Protecting what's important to you. Whether your team is your family, your business, or your employees, you can depend on Cross Insurance to provide the best insurance coverage solutions for what matters most. Cross Insurance has a reputation for building winning partnerships with teams of all sizes. Contact us today, and you can start protecting your team for tomorrow. Your team, your choice. Visit crossagency.com.
Hi there. I'm Janelle Manos, business reporter with the Boston Globe, and this is Outliers of Disruption, Rebuilding the Restaurant. I'm joined today by a whole panel of experts here in Boston who are thinking about the food industry and what the future holds for it and the restaurant community as we look ahead to the next few months and hopefully the next few years in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. If my panelists would be so kind to join me and turn their cameras on, I'll let them take a few minutes to introduce themselves, and then we can start the conversation. John, why don't you go first?
All right, hey everybody. My name is John Freeman. I'm one of the founders and COO at Freight Farms. I handle a lot of the day-to-day operations and product strategy for the company. So got my start in food actually through tech and design, which is an interesting way into the food supply system. But we actually got our start here in Boston. Our first farmers were here. It's a great local food economy. And now we got farms all over the world. So excited to talk to you guys today.
Thanks, John. Emma, why don't you go next?
Hi there. My name is Emma Snyder. My food roots go back, pun intended, go back to Berkeley, California. I grew up there as part of the Edible Schoolyard middle school program, pulling carrots out of the ground in the middle of the day. Thank you, Alice Waters. Since then, I was at Toast the last 4 years, getting to know the Boston restaurant community and supporting them in various roles, user research, and managing a lot of their accounts to help them be successful on the platform. I was part of the Toast layoffs in April and met my co-founder, who you'll meet in a second, Ethan Pierce, a week later, and just felt this need to continue to support the Boston restaurant community that I had gotten to know, and did that in a new way by co-founding Grocery Outpost, where we help restaurants sell groceries and transform them into these micro farm stands in every neighborhood.
Emma, since you mentioned Ethan, why don't we go to him next?
Hi everyone, Ethan Pierce. Pleasure to be here with you all. I grew up in Maine on a small family apple orchard and actually went through the pain myself watching that small family business close down a few years ago. Since then, I was able to move down here and went to Harvard for undergrad, started my first company and raised a little bit of money right out of school. So this is round 2 for entrepreneurship for me, but I think was really struck in April by the impact that the pandemic was having on all of these small businesses, and that was a call to action. So great to meet Emma and be on this adventure with her.
Fantastic. Jose, you're next in my little Brady Bunch queue, so I'll just go that way.
Hi everybody, my name is Jose Duarte. I'm the chef owner of Taranto Restaurant, a restaurant that was in the North End for 20 years. We're closed sadly a couple days ago. I'm backing everything up, but I'm keeping the restaurant open virtually. I'll talk a little bit about that. I was born in Peru. I lived in Venezuela for a while. My background is 100% hospitality, and for the last 15, 20 years, we've been really focused on sustainability. We have a social impact project in the central Andean of Peru. It's called the Santa Cruz Lodge. We also have a small Peruvian restaurant called Tambo 22 in Chelsea, which is 100% Peruvian, and Trattoria San Pietro in Norwell. So a little bit of that.
Thank you, Jose. And last but not least, Caroline, please.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Katzerubis. I'm also with Freight Farms. I've been with the company for about 7 years now, and I just come from a long-standing history in my family history in the food distribution business, just about 100 years distributing fruit and produce around the Boston area. And that kind of led me to look at food in a new way. So now I work at Freight Farms as the Director of Marketing and Community Relations, and I get to work with our amazing community of farmers, help tell their stories and amplify their voices through our channels.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. And thanks for everyone listening at home. I'm really excited about this conversation and the panelists, in part because I know it's been a really challenging time for the food industry. And I'm part of what I got out of my early conversations with them was a little bit of a sense of hope. So, Jose, I wanted to go to you first. You're the one who obviously is feeling the effects of this disruption most significantly, I would say. Can you just talk with us a little bit about, the decision to close your restaurant after being on Hanover Street for 20 years and what you're hoping to do next with the restaurant? Because as you mentioned, Toronto isn't over. It's just
it's over. No, it's not over.
Right?
It doesn't need to be over. So
no.
Yeah. So we opened a restaurant in a neighborhood that was primordially Italian. We came in with a little bit of this Peruvian Italian flavors, and our business was mostly a corporate business. We did a lot of functions. Our dependence was from a lot of the sporting events and any type of conferences, the marathon. So we sort of had a calendar of sources of revenue that we count on, so allow us to be sustainable economically and financially. We did a lot of corporate cooking classes, etc. So we were doing great, and all of a sudden, the motor stopped. So what do we do now? So we tried to become creative. This is something that took everybody by surprise. This wasn't planned. Immediately, one of my first, thoughts was to change a little bit of what I did, and I turned my restaurant into a pop-up taqueria. So I went completely the opposite of Italian because there was so many Italian as a takeout. So we did La Reina Taqueria. My guys were in the restaurant. We received some funds from the government, but there was no business. So we started actually selling a lot of tacos and burritos, but not enough to pay the rent. So we did that for a while, and then time went by and things were not getting better. We sort of start looking at the leverage. Our rent was really high. We tried to negotiate with the landlord, and we were not very successful. So we actually decided, I can't continue putting this toll on myself because I'm doing everything on my own. I cannot afford to pay people, so I'm doing 10 times more work than when I opened this restaurant the first time. And then every week is something different. So we have to adapt and go, hurry up, run, adapt, and then continue. So it was tiring. And at the end of the day, we basically said, we need to pause. We need to we're going to put our staff in storage. We're going to see if we can elevate this concept to something else. Can we make Taranta a virtual brand? Can we do some meals that are prepared at home? But that's one of the biggest challenges that I had, was trying to do deliveries and takeout. My food doesn't travel well. What can I do to make that experience better? So now I'm thinking how to use technology, how can I incorporate all these different products. I am trained to cook one way, but I need to start studying a little bit of sous vide, circulators, precision cooking. How can people actually recreate this meal at home so it tastes the same way as the restaurant? So there is a lot of research, there is a lot of work, there is a lot of technology that can help us. So I'm right now concentrated on wrapping this up and then start figuring out how to make that experience something that is more valuable. Everything is changing. We're changing. Our consumers are changing. Our chefs are changing. Restaurants in urban areas, downtown areas, they're not doing too good. It's empty. Everybody's moving to the suburban areas. So we need to actually adapt to that change, and so we can survive. It will come back eventually, but our behavior might change because people will realize, hey, I'm getting the same productivity in my company with half of the people staying home. Why do I have to pay all this money in real estate in downtown? Mm-hmm. So all the markets change. So that's what I'm doing. I have a lot of different things going on, but that's one of the ideas right now. So.
And it's so good to hear you say those things, in part because I know if it were myself, I'd just be sitting in a corner somewhere what am I going to do with my life? But you have so much hope, which is so good to hear. To that end, I wanted to throw the question out there to all of you, because I think all of you are thinking about this same question. It was really kind of the title of this event, but we know that restaurants have had to adapt in light of the pandemic. Let's move some tables outside was one of the first things that they did, right? Which is tremendous. For places like the North End that have always wanted outdoor seating, great. But when we think about the real impacts, the real shifts that we'll see within the restaurant community, I'd love to sort of see where you guys are thinking what restaurants will actually look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, having hopefully gone past the pandemic, but also just thinking about what restaurants can be or what they don't have to be anymore.
I don't know who wants to answer the question. I put my token in there. Until there is a vaccine, there's not going to be a lot of consumer confidence, and that's the biggest problem. So we can adapt to a point, but what I see right now is that the restaurants are going to be very successful. Most of small businesses are the ones that own the real estate. They don't have these overheads, and then actually can run it, buy, and stay in business. 3 years from now, we might have to continue with some protocols, but not as rigid or strict as we have doing it right now. But I think we as restaurants, we should focus a little bit more on, on the takeout experience, on the not necessarily having the experience in the restaurant, but how we can diversify that by adding value to it. So we need to add value to what we have. And a lot of restaurants actually could be doing that in the future, not necessarily selling the food prepared in the restaurant, maybe, but mostly packed as a restaurant. So you take your dessert home and you make it after. So you add some experiences to that. So let's see.
Yeah, Emma and Ethan, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your concept of grocery outposts, which is, again, came out of the pandemic. So you guys are, responding to a need and a sort of hole in the market that you identified. Talk to me, and I think also, hopefully, is one that restaurants will start to think more about. Wait, how do we go beyond the sort of physical space where you go to eat a meal, but maybe become more of a point of interaction for more food needs. And you're already seeing a little bit of that growth even in your company since you launched. So help explain what that is to the viewers at home.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think Emma and I both found ourselves jobless in early April. We were both working in the tech industry, and we actually met for the first time April 15th. And we had this idea. I had just seen an article a few days before saying that 70% of restaurants were anticipated to close permanently if the pandemic lasted through the end of June. And so that was just a huge call to action for us to try and do something. And so we had seen a lot of restaurants trying to set up these micro pantries in their storefronts to make ends meet. And we had heard from some of them that it was just really challenging to manage all of that themselves. They're not set up to do that. And so our whole concept initially with Grocery Outpost was how could we, as people in the tech world who, can build websites, can do a lot of that work, how could we actually take that weight off the restaurant and manage all of that? So the restaurant could really just be this facilitating point, a pickup point for all of these grocery orders from local farms, rather than taking on the work of supply chain management and building the website, et cetera. And it's been great. Over the past, 4 months, we've expanded from 2 locations to 10 grocery outposts in Greater Boston. And our goal now is really, we have this new sort of mission to have a farm stand on every block. This idea of actually, making farm food more accessible within the city and using these restaurants that have, built-in cold storage, they have built-in staffing, and they're already plugged into this hyper-local restaurant supply chain. How could we actually help them, these chefs who are so close to the food, they're doing this farm-to-table dining, how could we help them engage as community members? This idea of the restaurant really as a cultural community center that has deep roots within the community. How could we find supplemental revenue streams for them that they can come to depend on over time, that help engage the community in that same way?
And some of the things we get really excited about is that our model allows the restaurant to kind of do what they do best. Restaurants have hospitality baked into their DNA. They have those deep connections with the guests who are now, not just coming and supporting the restaurant through takeout purchases, but can come on and, pick a bundle of groceries up weekly and interact with the staff and poke their head in the restaurant in a safe way to a space that they miss. So for us, we get excited about deepening that connection between restaurant and guest and allowing it to be more than just what does takeout look like or the limited dine-in right now. So on that note, that's just where, we're taking off their plate all the logistics, the things that we've had experience kind of managing, and allowing them to really own the things that are delightful for both the guests and the employees, and in our sense are kind of what makes the restaurant a restaurant.
I mean, one of the big things I've noticed just in light of the sort of overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety that people have had in midst of the pandemic was, access and people, seeing empty shelves in the grocery store, and feeling like even it was unsafe to go to a grocery store early on in the pandemic. That led a lot of people to look local for their food. You've sort of I've seen some figures that CSAs have taken off, that, farmers markets have, still seen a steady uptick in terms of people coming out. I wanted to talk with both John and Caroline about what the sort of demand has looked like in terms of freight farms, because again, it's local in a different sense, right? It's not necessarily the quote unquote farm, that you see in your neighborhood or in your surrounding area, but it's in a box. It could be on your neighborhood, right? I mean, as demand and as sort of the supply chain stressors became more evident, particularly in light of the fact that there was COVID outbreaks happening in the supply chain, and people were really fearful about that. The idea of having fewer touches, fewer links in the chain, I think people were far more aware of it from the sort of, normal public side, as opposed to the food people who are here in this Zoom call, right? Who are always thinking supply chain. So can you talk with me a little bit about how local has come to be redefined in your context?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that the pandemic really put a magnifying glass on the limitations and the risks associated with a centralized food system. So for anybody who doesn't know, we build high performance container farms that can grow multiple acres in 320 square feet and grow a variety of crops 365 days a year. So the view that we've had has been really interesting because we have farms all across the US, and the kind of centralized food supply chain, they've had a lot of issues with having to leave crops on the field because they don't have labor to actually pick those crops, or any stop along the way that there was an outbreak. So it's been a very reactive time for anybody in food supply. And I think the relationship between production and restaurant is so interlinked. So you're reacting to whatever that restaurant is doing. A lot of our customers have restaurant customers themselves. And so there's a pivot happening in the restaurant where they're saying, okay, well, food delivery is a huge opportunity for us. It's been an opportunity for a while, and it doesn't really represent what is going to be going on the plate and into onto the tables. So I think building a little bit more transparency and figuring out what we can forecast is going to be very helpful for our producers based on kind of what kind of meal delivery or food delivery trends we see continue. But I would say a big pivot in the food production game, we've seen a lot of people kind of move away from restaurants and go direct to retail or direct to consumer, actually do CSAs and build that relationships themselves. Just because it's so uncertain. They know that people still need foods, people still need access, but have been uncertain about what the actual forecast is going to be coming from some of their mainstream buyers. So it's been a very interesting time. We've seen a lot of transparency issues come up through this, and we hope that by building a little bit more of a distributed network, we can build some more consistent foundation for everyone.
Yeah, I would say that our farmers by nature are very independent and localized, so they were able to very quickly pivot when the restaurants shut down. But then we also saw the opportunity arise that our customers were actually working with the restaurants that closed to, similar to Grocery Outpost, to create some sort of CSA pickup or direct to consumer pickup where the restaurant could act like it normally did and source from their local producers and just aggregate it into one box, and then it would be a neighborhood pickup location. So we've seen our customers significantly pivot, and then also act as just access for fresh produce to communities that weren't able to get access. So a lot of our small business farmers were donating to local food banks or food pantries, which is amazing because typically those type of communities or services only have non-perishable items. So to add something that's a fresh local produce that is sometimes looked at as a premium item was truly amazing. So from our customers' perspective, they definitely had their own issues with COVID, but then we've seen from our business side a significant increase in our inquiries and people who are looking to get into this type of producing, which is incredible because, you know, we have this little thing on our website that says, what's your interest in freight farms? And they are so clear on the issues in the food supply chain that they just want to figure out a way to contribute positively. So we are really excited to be that infrastructure for them to get started.
Yeah, I would say for, you know, our restaurateurs who are having to be so reactive to any gaps in the supply chain, being able to build a relationship with, like, a one-to-one relationship with farmer where you can have that discussion about what you're going to grow 24/7, 365 days a year. That is like such a warm feeling for them to know that in 3 months, it's still going to be the same supply, still going to be the same quality. So we love seeing that happen where, you know, that's actually a foundation piece for a new restaurant concept to get started. And to Caroline's point, I think in any crisis, everybody starts going on Google, how to grow your own food. So we've seen a huge uptick of people really interested in growing locally and growing their own food, so which we love to see.
When you're gonna start like building those backyard freight farms anytime soon, right? So I can get lettuce all year in Boston, maybe soon. We'll see.
I volunteer as tribute.
Yeah.
Use the basements. There's so many basements that are unused spaces in the city. Why don't everybody packs their basements with growing things? You know,
there you go. See, that's the type of disruption we need.
That's it. Those basements are doing nothing.
I love it. I will say too, if you're watching at home and you do have a question for us, a few folks have submitted, but please do use the Q&A system, and I'll try and pull from the audience as we go. But I love Jose's point, and I wanted to bounce off of that a little bit. You know, when we think about space, right? You know, part of the concept of a restaurant has always been, you know, it's a place with tables and people sit and they eat and, you know, yeah, then you leave and you pay. I mean, when you think about, we talked a little bit about what the restaurant of the future looks like, but, you know, physical space in the restaurant world can be really different as it will feel different, obviously, for the next few months as the weather gets colder and we have to think about, you know, whether people feel comfortable indoors. But as we if we break out of the box of what a restaurant is, you know, what are some ways that might manifest? I know we talked a little bit, the idea of the ghost kitchen is one that I'm hearing a lot about, and I'm curious to see where you feel like each of your various enterprises might fit into that model. And for those of you watching at home who haven't heard about what a ghost kitchen is, it's essentially, you know, a kitchen without a restaurant and, you know, operating space where the food is being prepared, but it's often just for delivery only, or if it's for some other location that doesn't have an actual restaurant dine-in component. You know, it's in some cases, you know, these kitchens exist only on apps where you can, you know, get them, but you know, there's no actual physical side of it. So I'm curious, tell me a little bit more about ghost kitchens and other new physical manifestations of the restaurant, if you're thinking of them. Jose, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, the idea of a virtual restaurant, Taranta becoming a virtual restaurant, that's what the whole idea is, you know. So the way I see the future is that we're going to have competition, but it's going to be online. So we're going to have brands. If you have a product, unique product, Taranta's cuisine is unique, dishes are unique. So you can virtually place it in different places and have the ghost kitchen execute it and produce that. So the competition becomes, rather than a physical location trying to draw people, it just becomes virtual. So it's actually apps or, you know, things competing against one each other. You heard the case of Chili's restaurant selling these wings brands or something you ordered online. It actually comes from Chili's, or Chuck E. Cheese selling this San Marino's pizza, or this Italian pizza that is, everybody's like, oh my God, delicious, but it comes from the Chuck E. Cheese kitchen.
From Chuck E. Cheese, yes, I know. When I found that out, my mind was blown.
Right, or La Reina Taqueria. I mean, La Reina Taqueria was online until 3 days ago. If you're in the area, you want tacos, burritos, you go, and of course, Uber Eats is taking all this thing, but it's a virtual kitchen. We were in an Italian kitchen dishing out some tacos and burritos. So that's an interesting concept. You know, I still think that there's a lot of homework because me as a chef, I want you to have that experience. If I sell a pappardelle with mushrooms, you know, and it gets to your house, it's going to be a packed, compact lump of things. So what is the perception value? Are people really enjoying that, or just want to eat it and watch Netflix? You know, so this is what I want to know. I want to know if there is really that texture, flavor, temperature, perception in all these, or just want to order and eat it. Because if there is that perception on flavor, texture, we need to do homework. We have to see the way that food gets to you the way you want it to get. You know, we work with all these apps, and all we get is a lot of complaints. Oh, my pork chop is overcooked. Yeah, I saw it in the car for an hour and a half going all over the city when it got to your house, you know, because the driver had to do more pickups and drop-offs. You know, we served it right, we sent it right, but it got there overcooked and cold. So how do we work on that? So that's a little bit of the questioning that I have with that. And then you as a chef, you know, you lose a little bit of your passion for things, because everything becomes methodic and becomes technical and precision, and you know, you become more an empiric scientist rather than a creative mind that throws things on a plate and there it is, you know. So how do we see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think we all think of food, and like the story around the food is half of why we go support our local restaurants. We want to support the people who go out and say, love what you're doing, like take my money. And then without local, the story becomes so much more important, right? And I think we'll see a wave of stories that just aren't true. And because it's all about brand, who can build the fastest brand? But it's really important that the transparency comes along with that like people can back it up, because you want to support that family, you want to support that business that's doing what you believe in. And if it's all kind of flashy stuff online, yeah, I'm worried that whoever can build the biggest story wins, and it's not about who's really putting in the work. So I think transparency is going to be really key as we have this hybrid of online and distributed kitchens.
I'd love to also add, just again, I think that's where the connection to the guest really, really shines, where these are people who have, you know, treated their regulars well over time and know their guests like the back of their hand. So I want to call out one of our restaurant partners, Juliet. They ran a series called Restaurant Without Walls, which I think is just a wonderful name for it, where they were doing, you know, rather than just, hey, watch me make food, they were treating it as this whole experience where what do people want in quarantine? They wanted to have a very unique experience. They want to feel a connection to their food, to the people behind their food. So they've pulled that off really well, as well as Irene Lee from May, who's done hand-pulled noodle classes and dumpling making classes. And just, you know, how do you share your passion virtually, which is something I know Jose has been thinking about. But those are two ways that I think the restaurants have been able to kind of break into home kitchens. The third is also just making these pantry items. We've seen a lot of our restaurants start to sell their jarred sauces or their condiments, or Juliet does an amazing toasted breadcrumb or pappardelle or spiced blueberry jam. I know it's lunch, I'm gonna make us all very hungry. But what I like about that is it becomes really easy to almost do that last mile of cooking and add the flavor of the restaurant, or feel like you have some sense of what that restaurant brings in your home.
Jose, I know you've also thought about the restaurant experience far beyond the sort of confines of the restaurant, where you actually bring guests to your, you know, to the land that you have where you're cultivating your crops, and you sort of are the origin story of your recipes, which I think will, you know, I write about retail in all forms, right? And every single person I talk to in the retail industry, the one word they've had is experiential, where, you know, particularly younger generations, but I think everyone is really kind of looking for those connections and want to feel like they have a relationship with a brand, whether it's a makeup company or a salad or a restaurant. But Talk with me a little bit about maybe what the role you see your whole, I mean, you've got kind of a whole beautiful little farm.
Yeah. So we started this project about 5 years ago. We took an Andean agricultural community in the middle of the central Andean region of Peru, and I was fascinated by their community work and all the natural production that they had. So one of the things that we occurred as a restaurant was, how can we help this community of farmers improve their quality of lives, but at the same time connect them directly with our consumers. For example, we serve a lot of quinoa, kiwicha, aguaymanto, which is a Cape gooseberry, and they produce that. So what is that experience that we can bring from connecting Don Miguel, who's the farmer that is in the lodge, with the consumers, so they understand, especially children, the youth, bring them there and have this hand-to-hand experience and learn that a potato actually, needs a lot of work. How hard it is to spend one day with the farmer, like have a little bit more appreciation for food, because ultimately we're losing on that, that humanity in food is being lost. So the idea is to create this connection and at the same time use technology. So we are working very close with the Lima Fab Lab, which is a spin-off of the MIT Fab Labs, and then we're trying to create procuring and distribution systems for these local organic natural farmers to connect with the chefs in Lima. We're also trying to do a lot of stuff with nutrition and 3D printing with lyophilized products, bioreactors that produce cyanobacteria in a restaurant here that is pure protein that modulates the same environmental conditions of a high altitude lagoon in Peru at the same time. So we have a lot of interesting stuff happening, but I think at the end of the day is that experience, that feeling that you will have by saying, oh my God, this potato tastes 10 times better now because I am understanding how the whole process went and how you connect that. So we want to globalize these communities, helping, but we also want to localize ourselves. You go on these fields and walk around and people stop and says, good afternoon, sir. And they keep walking. It's like, what happened here? So it's kind of a way to disconnect. So we're hoping that project takes off next year, and we'll start creating these experiences out of Tambo restaurant, directly connecting with them, and Taranta becoming that virtual part with all the technology and having that connection eventually. So.
I'm so excited to watch that evolve. That'll be really fun. One of the big stories that have also come out of the pandemic, of course, is not just, how hard restaurants have been hit, which of course I've been writing that story, but also just how the public has been hit so hard. And just knowing the need for emergency food and how our food pantries have been overwhelmed with need, and particularly as some of the unemployment benefits ran out. I talked with somebody at Project Bread who just said we are bracing for an onslaught just a few weeks ago, right? What role do you feel like each of you is playing in that part of the food system, and how do you feel like the restaurant industry can help, again, offset some of those concerns in terms of getting emergency food to folks who need it?
Yeah, so one initiative that we ran with Grocery Outpost from day one was the Fill the Fridge campaign, where we've actually been able to do, I think, close to $10,000 in groceries for first the nurses and frontline workers, but then we really shifted to focusing on this huge food insecurity pandemic that we're seeing happening everywhere. So I think a big priority for us as we continue to grow this out is how can we make these things more affordable, and then how can we also leverage our network of restaurant partners and food suppliers to be able to take some of this food that was a lot of hype a couple of months ago about just the vast amount of food that's rotting in the fields because it was intended for restaurants. So how do you actually use the restaurant supply chain to repurpose some of that food for these folks in need?
I would say that at Freight Farms, at least, we are also looking at it less from the perspective of emergency food access, but just consistent fresh food access. and making sure, and this honestly just comes to life through the network of farmers that we've been able to empower with our technology. We have numerous customers operating all over the world. I can think of one in particular that's been very hard hit by COVID, but also just recent social issues, is Pillsbury United Communities in Minneapolis. And they actually operate one of our farms at their grocery store, which is called North Market. And they've created this incredible program that is a really holistic look at food access and health and nutrition. So on top of growing fresh produce right on site, they're growing culturally relevant produce and engaging their community, educating them on how food is grown. To Jose's point, it creates this connection to your food and to your farmer, and then you're more inclined to actually eat healthy because you understand the process in which it's grown. And then within this grocery store, they actually have access to a nutritionist right on staff. So while you're shopping, you are able to talk to someone specifically about, okay, if I have these health issues, what food should I be choosing that is best for my condition to help me, rise out of my situation. So, and that's just one instance. We have farmers all over the world, like I mentioned, just contributing to food access to communities that do not have sources, especially local food sources, which is pretty incredible.
I love that model, Caroline. I want that model everywhere. I would love to go to a grocery store and talk to a nutritionist about what my menu should look like. It's brilliant. I'm getting a couple questions from readers, from viewers. So I'm going to try and make sure I get through them. One is, do business values like locally sourced food, carbon footprint, organic, or workplace culture translate to customer preferences? And how do you measure this for your companies? So I think my sense is that customers are really interested in these values, value-driven in businesses. And I'm wondering how you've made some decisions in your businesses to help make sure that your customers know about those values if you do hold them.
Yeah, so I come from a user research background. I love talking to customers. I love being the megaphone for their needs and preferences. And Ethan has let me run wild with this, which I'm very grateful for. So we've talked to about 20 of our 500 or so households. And we were wondering, is organic important? Is local important? Is peak season important? And what we heard is that people want to know where their dollars are going. They want their wallet to align with their values. So I heard customers saying, I used to go to Whole Foods 4 times a week on my commute home, and that was my routine. And I asked them, how many times have you gone since quarantine and since the pandemic? And they said, I've been really proud. I've only gone once every 2 months. And that to me just really kind of spoke to this shift where people are willing to put more of the effort into sourcing things that require a little more creativity, a little more craftiness, but align more strongly with what they want to support right now. So we try to stay in touch by surveying, by interviewing our customers, and overwhelmingly we've heard this support for, especially now, I want to support local. I want to play a part in the healthiness of my community and just really keeping these businesses afloat.
Yeah, I think that's going to be. Just adding to Emma's thought, I think we're at a point now where we're at about 6 months of this, and they say it only takes about 16 weeks to build a habit, right? And I'm really interested to see how consumer habits have shifted in so many ways, but particularly in our food consumption habits. If you got out of the habit of going to Whole Foods and now you're going to your grocery outpost, that could be a real shift in your wallet and your, it's the whole wallet notion that most people, the people talk about Whole Foods, it could be a significant difference in what you're spending and also how you think about that spend. Caroline, I want to let you weigh in on that too.
Yeah, I was just thinking, consumer preference is what has really driven the whole local food movement, as people are increasingly interested in knowing where their food is coming from, who it's being grown by. and institutions or companies are adapting to serve their consumers more. So whether that is, restaurants that are pivoting to source more locally from local producers, or grocery chains that are trying to incorporate brands that are also grown regionally or locally. And then schools also is a big one, because students are so interested in sustainable food sources, locally sourced food. So they're having to adapt very quickly and find solutions, because the centralized food system operates very efficiently, getting food from California all the way to Massachusetts quickly. So having to figure out those new kind of supply chains can be very difficult, especially in somewhere like Boston or the Northeast that experiences 4 seasons. There's only, summer and part of fall that you're able to source locally. So trying to figure out solutions to those problems is very much top of mind for companies, just to satisfy consumer demand.
Absolutely. And I think, one thing that I would add in there that's been just a fascinating learning for me is how different consumers weight that local or organic differently when they're looking at price and all of these convenience and other factors. So one thing that we heard from a user interview that was just sort of blew my mind was one of our users who would take her Wegmans app to the farmer's market and do a price comparison. And this is actually a behavior that we hear a lot in our consumers. So they still are really price sensitive when it comes to this, and convenience is still a huge factor for them. So when we're looking at how do local food sources compete with online grocers, these massive online grocers that have just eaten up huge swaths of the market, I think to contextualize it here, consumers in America, 28% of them ordered online or 26% ordered online in 2018. And now in the first 2 quarters of 2020, 54% of Americans have ordered online from these big online box grocers. So how do we, as entrepreneurs, as consumers, work together to make sourcing local food as convenient and as affordable as some of these big box chains that are flying things in from California or other countries? And that's just it's a big challenge and a big question for us, how we close that gap so that local weighting can really lean in and change that consumer behavior.
I'll just note that today Walmart announced Walmart Plus, which is their version of Amazon Prime, and which gets it's a similar model where you pay a fee up front and you get on-demand deliveries of food and other things. So as we think about that kind of like conglomerate in terms of the control for the food industry in particular, it's getting bigger in some ways. So it is good to see the sort of value of local. Actually, in some studies, people value local over organic. The sort of it has more, people weigh it more, which is interesting, and that's been a shift in recently too. John, I want to let you respond. Sorry, I jumped in there.
No, I mirror all those things. I would just say, after 2020, after this year, I think environmental and ethical is rising at least hopefully 50% to price and convenience. And I think what will be interesting to see as we all go more online, convenience is going to rise up. Hopefully we can get a little bit of the transparency of how ethical and environmentally sound the things we're buying are. So I think there's an awareness there and there's a want there. Hopefully the laziness in all of us to just say, well, it's cheaper and it's right there, isn't going to get the best of us.
I think that if we can get more local farmers to produce more, one of the ideas that I always had in my mind for many years is the farm bill. I mean, that money is all going to ethanol, to corn, high sucrose corn. If we can use those funds to sort of help these farmers so we can have a more accessible local product that can be distributed along the community will be a big thing. So the farm bill is something that has been always in a fight and trying to get these incentives to the farmers that will make a big difference. And I think that we can get actually more get younger people motivated to farm. I mean, the land around here is a more, development. It's better for the land than producing strawberries. So how can we make that a priority so we can help these for small farmers or get more people interested in farming? We're very dependable. California, peak oil. What happens when we eat peak oil and that oil is super expensive? How much are you going to pay for that head of lettuce from California? We're so vulnerable with the winters, in reality. And also how much fuel it's in an apple. So when you look at all these footprints and those elements, that's a very important part.
One piece this is a question from a viewer, but also it's something that I think we in New England think a lot about, which is, we only do have our sort of small window of growing opportunity here. So if you want lettuce year round, you can either get a freight farm container, which not accessible for the public maybe at large yet. I'm waiting for my big one. Or you could, take it from across the country, or you could, try and do some of the models now, which are more, 365-day a year, indoor grown hydroponics, things like that. I mean, when we think about what New England can do to have more of a 365-day a year growing season, what are some technologies, some innovations you're seeing that could potentially allow us to be more local year round and also, help supply our local restaurants and, support a new economy along those lines?
Well, if this isn't just a pitch for freight farms, I don't know what is. But I'll say to jump off of that and Jose's point, we want to make farming cool. We want to make farming something that people see as a viable profession that is something they can make money off of and they can grow. And they don't need a lot of experience to get into it. I think previously, if anybody online thinks about farming, it's like, there's like a lot of biology I'm going to have to figure out, or there's a lot of agriculture stuff that I never took classes on. We want to kind of take that out of the equation so that everybody feels like they can get into this game and they can expect the results of any commercial farm. So I think a farmer in America, it's a really hard and thankless job, and it's a really lonely job. And so on the hard part, that's where technology can really help. We can make a farm that's very resilient, very dynamic, and very predictable. So we came out with a greenery 2019, and that is one of the most versatile farms in the world and one of the most reliable. So wherever you go, you're going to get the same experience as somebody halfway across the world. And we also have this platform called Farmhand, so you can actually communicate with those people halfway across the world and build a community around farming, track all the things you're doing, but also share your results and not feel like you're out in the middle of a cornfield and have no one to talk to and the government's not getting your back. We really want to make sure that that there's a support system around you and that you are part of something bigger.
And John and Caroline, I'm just curious, how many of your customers are operating their truck, their freight farm independently, and how many of them are doing it in tandem with an actual farm itself? The idea that their growing season can be extended by having certain things happen in the off seasons.
Yeah, I would start by saying that the largest percentage of our actual customers and farmers are independent individuals like you and myself. So like John mentioned, you don't actually need experience in agriculture to get started. And those are the people that are truly making the most impact in their local communities because they're able to just, use the freight farm as the platform, but then build their mission and motivation for getting started on top of that. So whether that is selling to local restaurants or selling to their local schools, creating some sort of CSA. So they have the freedom to design their program however they really want to. And we see that a lot of our customers have some sort of, I don't know whether it's like a 6th degree of separation from someone who has been farming in their ancestral lines. So they often are called to kind of start this in a new way. Like John said, we're trying to make it cool and make it Cool. And ooh, Janelle, I'm getting feedback from you. Sorry. So then the way that we're able to do that is to provide that platform that untethers them from something like the need to own land. So we're able to access this next generation of potential farmers. But a lot of them do work in tandem with traditional farmers, or they are traditional farmers that are just trying to extend their growing season. So they're not restricted by seasonality constraints.
Great, and sorry for that bit of feedback there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. One question from another question from a reader I want to address. Oh, there was one quick one too, Caroline, about what was the name of the model in Minnesota that you spoke about?
Yes, so that the name of the grocery store is called North Market, and it is owned by Pillsbury United Communities.
And this one, I just think this is probably a good one for us to close on. But you know, as we're thinking about the many disparities that have been laid bare in light of the pandemic, and then the sort of social unrest around racial injustice, you know, what can the food industry and the restaurant industry really do to address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion going forward? I think we're going to learn, you know, nothing will be the same out of this, right? There's a real opportunity for growth here. So what are some things that you think the various parts of the food industry that you work on, you know, how will you be able to help shape that going forward?
I'll jump in first. I think, you know, to piggyback on some of the things we said, knowing who's growing your food and supporting those people, and as consumers, raising the bar for what we pay for food, because I think a lot of the people who are actually doing the work are getting the short end of the stick, and they are, you know, we want to bring those people up, and we want to make sure that there's more opportunities for people to get into agriculture as a foundational business to grow their business, their community, and their own like career development. I think right now, you know, whoever is in the field picking the vegetable that you eat is so removed from your experience, and we want to really shorten that gap and really fortify the front part of food production.
I think that one of the biggest part is technology can help us achieve that, you know, to connect with these communities, you know, to support the human element, you know, the invisible men that we don't see in tomato fields, you know, so it's very well seen. But at the same time, we make an extraordinary effort to support those small dedicated producers that are part of the communities. In my particular case, winemaking. I don't serve any of the big brands, any of the commercial brands. I only serve wines from biodynamic, organic, you know, all natural producers that are hands-on in production, and they need a way of living. You know, and I do it the same way with a lot of the companies. It's a lot of the work, so we can actually provide a better opportunity. And at the same way, I think with technology and logistics eventually, because that's a big field now, logistics, you know, how things are going from one place to another through technology, the middleman is going to disappear. So we can connect directly with that producer and support it directly. I did it with Trace and Trust and seafood, and tracing fish with edible QR codes. We bought directly from the fishermen, prime price. So they had a better opportunity to better their lives of the hard work. So I think that's something that, you know, we can do to include more of these dedicated producers, you know, so they can have a better end result. So.
I want to add one quick thing as well. So building the technology that ultimately lowers the barrier to entry for more people to get into food production. Specifically, you know, the BIPOC community is vastly underrepresented in the farming industry, and that's due to a number of different systemic issues within our system, specifically lending discrimination. So at Freight Farms, one of the things that we are trying to move forward is making sure that we are advocates for our BIPOC community that wants to grow into this industry. So being there as, support during the financial lending process, to just advocate for them as individuals, to make sure that they're getting access, whether that be to land or the technology that they need to get into the industry in the first place.
I love that. That's a really big part of the equation for sure.
I think a big thing for us is really taking cues from the incredible people who are in our industry, our restaurant partners, like Irene Lee of May, who she has just been, for those of you who don't know, I urge you to look up May. They're over in Fenway. And Irene has just been an incredible, almost social justice warrior, social entrepreneur, leading the way in trying to call out the injustices against people of color and Black and brown bodies within our community, women within our community. Particularly, it's insidious in the restaurant community, and we've seen a little bit of that in Boston with some folks called out over the last few months. And so I think it's important for us as consumers first to pay attention to those things and make our dollars work to pressure some of these restaurants to change and become more inclusive partners, more inclusive employers, and also to, as entrepreneurs, really take cues from the folks who are doing the good work to partner and uplift them wherever we can, which is the approach that Emma and I have taken.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being on the panel today, for taking time out of your, I know, busy days to be with us at the Globe. And thank you to everyone at home who's been spending your lunch hour with us. Hopefully we haven't gotten you too hungry in all of our conversations. I know I need to go eat my lunch now, but really appreciate it all. Please feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up questions. I tell everyone, I'm like, this is where I get all my story ideas. So I look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you. And thank you, everyone watching at home. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Guys.